Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final discussion within a series of symposiums in conjunction with Ford Theater's current production of Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles by Adrian Kennedy and Adam Kennedy. Each session is designed to offer a deeper dive into the plays as well as the themes and cultural legacies surrounding it. And in case you weren't able to attend the earlier sessions, please go to fordtheater.com and check out the other panel discussions. I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for tonight's discussion, Writing Ourselves into History, Black Women in Autobiographical Writing. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joanne Braxton and Professor Omiyemi Green. I'm going to share a little bit from their bios here. Dr. Joanne Braxton is an emeritus Francis L. and Edwin L. Cummings Professor of the Humanities at William and Mary. Dr. Braxton is the author and editor of several books, including Black Women Writing Autobiography, a tradition within a tradition, Wild Women in the Whirlwind, the Contemporary Renaissance in Afro-American Literature and Culture, and Monuments of the Black Atlantic, Slavery and Memory. Dr. Braxton also edited the collected poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar, now in its seventh printing. Her play, Crossing a Deep River, a ritual drama in three movements, has been shown at Harvard, William and Mary, the National Black Theater Festival, and Morgan State University, where the department developed a curriculum based around the play. So welcome, Dr. Braxton. And we also have Professor Omiyemi Green, who is a director, dramaturg, and interdisciplinary scholar artist at William and Mary. She has been jointly appointed in the program of Africana Studies since 2013, and at the pleasure of her colleague, she has directed Africana Studies since 2016. In addition to her responsibilities at William and Mary, Professor Green serves as the inaugural executive editor of the Black Theater Review and was a former president of the Black Theater Network. Dr. Green has published widely in several arenas, including the Journal of American Drama and Theater, the Journal of American Folklore, August Wilson Journal, and African American Culture, an encyclopedia of people, traditions, and customs. Thank you both for joining us this evening, and welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I want to remind our audiences prior to starting that we will be taking questions. So please do submit your questions throughout the conversation, and we will certainly get to them. And to my guest today, shall we jump into our discussion?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna begin. You know, as both of your work center Black cultural production through literature, theater, and performance, I want to begin by asking you both to share just a little bit of how you came to this work.
I'm going to kunle to my elder in the field and in cultural production, Dr. Braxton first.
Well, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be with you. If we're talking about autobiography, if we're talking about theater, I think so much begins for me with listening, sitting with my elders, with my own elders when I was a youngster, listening to these amazing stories and wondering why these stories were not in books. And that is the whole elan or force behind my investigations of African American women's autobiography, which can take so many forms because so many of our elders express their autobiographies through poetry, through slave narratives, through petitions, through testimony in church, through autobiographical dance, through spirituals and the blues. So autobiography by Black American women has been with us a long time and in many, many different genres, including theater and ritual. And I believe this play functions as both.
Thank you for that.
For me, it's going to start with my grandmother, right, who put a copy of Ntozake Shange's For Colored Girls Who Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Was Enough in my hands at the age of 13. And I didn't quite understand all of what she was offering me at the age of 13, but that later became clearer to me as I took courses in college early on in my tenure and was able to see myself in the center of cultural production by way of theater specifically, but also begin to get a language for being able to talk about, that experience in its presentation form and its methodological construction, which then inspired me to want to either create that work for my own self in terms of writing my own narratives and or creating space where I can share the narratives of others in a visual way. And so I was a freshman in college when I was bitten by the theater bug, so to speak. And I knew then in taking the African American Theater History course, history and performance course, that I wanted to tell more of these stories. And I just really had to get the courage, right, to shift my thinking. I went into college thinking I was going to do one thing and then decided that it was ancestrally mandated that I do something different. It was a Black playwright, Alexis Devoe, who came to witness. She's the author of A Tapestry, a play woven in two acts. And William and Mary produced that work when I was a senior. And right before we all went on stage, she came to us backstage and said to us that if you don't do what your ancestors have carved out the space for you to do, then you are, in a sense, not only she didn't use the word Ori, but she was, starting to tap into some ritualized constructions, of our psyche, which spoke to me. But she said you also, in a sense, disavow all that those who have gone before and carved a way for you to do this work. You disavow that, right? And so I took up the mantle at that time, and decided that I was going to be a culture bearer, and it has stuck ever since.
I'm glad you mentioned Ntozake Shange and Alexis Devoe. Many people do know who Ntozake Shange is, primarily because of her famed production for Colored Girls. And there are people who don't. I also want to acknowledge that, right? There are folks who are just coming to Shange's work, primarily through theater and more specifically, in literature courses and so forth in college. But Alexis Devoe is a name that is not often said in particular circles. She's important. And the reason why I'm sort of jumping on that is because I actually write about Alexis Devoe's work, or I did in my dissertation, in my current book project. I'm thinking back to, as my own work looks at Glenda Dickerson, a pioneer in theater and performance, and her working relationship with Alexis Devoe. Glenda writes in some of her earlier essays how she helped, she was a part of the process of taking her play No and forming it, the poems, and forming it into a performance piece. And there's some pictures of the productions and so forth in one of her published works. And so that made me really happy, right? That we can sort of, pull into names and so forth. Thank you for that. Thank you both for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about Adrienne Kennedy and what she's doing with this play. Dr. Braxton, you sort of hinted at that, right? The genre and the form. So, Adrienne Kennedy, she wrote this with her son Adam Kennedy, the play Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles? And the way I think about it is it's an entryway into this very important moment within Adrienne Kennedy's life, right? We get this glimpse of this moment right before she became this, nationally or internationally celebrated playwright. And the play is written in narrative form, and so we hear Kennedy's words verbatim. And I actually would argue that this is a form of documentary theater or documentary play. And Dr. Braxton, I actually quote one of your earlier works on Black women's literature and autobiography in the Playbill essay. And so let me read a little bit of that. And I say, Adrienne Kennedy's narrative follows in the tradition of Black women writers, to quote scholar Joanne Braxton, who used literature by way of the African American oral tradition of spiritual narrative and bearing witness to define their experiences and recall a coming to consciousness of self in a world that does not treasure, nurture, or protect Black women. And so, with that, I'm going to start with you, Dr. Braxton. What is the importance of Black women's literature generally, but more specifically within the context of autobiographical writing?
Thank you so much. One of the things that Black women's autobiographical expression does is open moral space. And it establishes a space wherein the autobiographer can tell a free story. This is saying a lot because you can imagine the constraints that were put on this particular narrative by others who told the story for Adrienne. I've read the play now and seen the show, and she says, and more than once, someone is saying to her, "What do you think you're trying to do?"
Mm.
And she's trying to prevent the appropriation of her work. But when someone else tells this story, it's going to be told in a different way. So this autobiographical writing can open a moral space where she can tell a free story, negotiate for respect and self-definition, and more importantly than anything, she can heal herself. She can begin to heal herself from the moral injury she has experienced from someone who claims to be an exemplar of love. The Beatles sing, "All you need is love." Well, clearly you need a lot more than love because she came bringing the love, but now she needs to heal. And in its purest form, this autobiographical act it's a whole autobiography. It is, as you said, a significant moment in her life, a significant moment in history. It's expressed in the form of an interview, which, as a folklorist, an interview always has two authors, although that's not always acknowledged.
Right.
But it remains an interview, I think, an autobiographical interview until it is staged. And here's the thing that stands that interview on its head. When it's staged so that she is facing the audience and her son is standing behind her, that turns that stage into ritual ground. So it is a moment in time through which she invokes both theater and ritual to achieve transformational justice around the appropriation of others who claim that all you need is love. But in the background, we have lots of questions about appropriation, theft, and what does love really mean in a context such as this, where she is the generator of an idea, admittedly based on Lennon's work, but it becomes so important for others not only to guess the narrative and the telling of the story from her, but also to kick her off the project altogether after she has conceived it. So it's a powerful redress of moral injury and a negotiation for respect, where she reclaims autonomy and authority in a way that also heightens our consciousness around the public figures of the Beatles. So, right on, sister. You got him.
Dr. Braxton, you just gave us a lecture, and I am I'm sitting here taking notes, right? I am in this moment. I am a student, and I am taking notes, right? Um, I think what you have just given us is, a lecture about the importance of Black women's literature in general. And what I pulled from that is, in thinking about Adrian Kennedy and this play, writing themselves into history in many ways, it seems as though it validates their lived experiences.
Absolutely. And why should it be necessary to validate our lived experience
Right,
before the dominant culture?
right,
Because we are here, and because we have as much right to joy, the joy of expression and the joy of seeing others appreciate the work of the ancestors as it comes through us.
right.
This is someone, who people associate with surrealism, and in this case she's shown us how surreal different aspects of the Black experience can be on
Yes,
a common ongoing basis. And what is so sad about it is, I would imagine that almost every Black woman writer has had some experience of others walking off with a piece of my stuff, as if
Yeah.
would have said. So
yes,
whether it's your heart or your play or something else, um, it's far too common in experience. And I love the way that she has validated not only her life, but the life of every Black woman writer who has ever had an experience of somebody ripping off your stuff.
yes,
Mm.
yes. That's, you quoting Antizaki Shange's for Color Girls is a perfect segue into my next question. And Omi, I'm gonna throw this question your way. As we see with Adrian Kennedy and many other Black women playwrights, that theater has been used as a vehicle to illustrate, again, the lived experiences of Black women, but also the Black community, right? I would add that in as well. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of Black women's work within the context of theater and performance?
Yeah. Um, and I'm thinking about this question specifically because we keep using this term, Black theater. I like operational definitions, and I think it's important to have some framing context.
Yes,
So when we talk about Black theater imagined or autobiographical, written by Black women to illustrate lived experience, first, the importance of Black theater lies in its ethics and what it is purposed to do, right? So, imagined or autobiographical, one early definition we get from Paul Carter Harrison is that Black theater as a form of cultural production with a distinct social and sacred algorithm should be a form, and I quote, of ethnic reaffirmation which invites spiritual renewal for people who have been physically dislocated, psychically disremembered,
mm,
right? So, thus, one of its purposes is to invite spiritual renewal and remembering through its illustrations of Black lived experiences. And Dr. Braxton, in all of her wisdom, and I knew she was going to bring it, this is why we let our elders, come and carve a path for us, to follow, was talking about and hinting at some of these premises of Black theater in this notion of self definition, this idea of self respect, this idea of self healing, this notion of transformational justice, right, is a survival strategy. Right. So when we're engaging Black theater, these are the kinds of things that we're supposed to walk away from having bore witness to the work. So, secondly, whether the work is imagined or autobiographical theater, when we listen to another elder, Andre de Shields, he says that theater, and I quote, is the way to life, end quote. So, in other words, when we come to the theater, we are sailing on, we are drinking in the primordial waters of life, right? These waters being the collective consciousness that is being served by the artist at the time. Water, which is ethically sourced, sound, imbued with Black theater principles, again, getting back to this idea of self definition, healing, spiritual renewal, transformational justice, contains everything that those who bear witness will need for the realization, the redemption, the revolution, and survival, not only of those who are participating in the storytelling process, but of those who are sitting, on the other side of the stage, right, bearing witness to this text. Thus, another purpose of Black theater in premise and presentation, as Barbara and Carlton Mollett, doctors Barbara and Carlton Mollett taught us, it signifies its importance in how it ignites and tempers the Black imaginary, right? This ability to envision and cultivate life in the face of death, hope in the face of despair, replace fear with courage. And since Dr. Braxton mentioned this notion of love as well, if only for ourselves, right, in the face of, all that hates us, right? And engages in these practices, that are anti-Black. So, Black theater is supposed to, temper us in ways that encourage hope, that give us these survival strategies for coping. When I think about coping, I think about the work of August Wilson, right? Who talks about, the societal constructions that seek to dehumanize, one. And so here we have Adrienne Kennedy coming into this, process of writing, right, to in a sense, claim her humanity, right, as she writes herself into history.
It's interesting because I'm Dr. Braxton, are you going to say something? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. So I was thinking about this play and where it's set, right? So it's in London. And one of the things that I love about literature, especially Black literature, is that it sort of demystifies or debunks the idea of several things, right? First and foremost, that Black folks are illiterate. It also illustrates a lived experience that goes beyond, local borders, right? And so what we see in this play as well is Adrienne Kennedy traveling the world. We hear her talk about her time in Africa. We also hear her talk about her time in Europe, as well as in the place taking place in London. And it's illustrating for us, right, a lived experience that while many have not necessarily had, right, but the fact that this woman is talking about this experience as early as the middle of the 1960s, right, which debunks the idea that Black folks are illiterate, that they're not traveled, and it also illustrates for us how they have come into a particular form of consciousness because of their world travel and their experiences globally. Yeah.
What this makes me think of is the diasporic eye, right? Yes. Now I'm thinking about criticism, and how one, as not only a writer, but also a critic, and also one engaged in the process of cultural production, Black cultural production specifically, has to have a cultural eye. And that eye is only shaped when it has the opportunity to become well-versed through experience, through theory and practice, multiple cultural origins, right? It's these multiple cultural origins, because we know that Blackness is not, a monolith,
right,
but it's these multiple cultural origins that often make up the interior life, right, of the work, right? And so it's you, it's me, it's Dr. Braxton, it's all the others with the cultural eye that see a text, but actually see the subtext of a text. And then that tends to be the stuff that we, in our dramaturgical acumen, then use to then envision this life, that she has created here with her son in form and practice.
Adrienne Kennedy wrote this play in 2000, but we know that she's been writing as early as 1964 in terms of being a published playwright and produced playwright. But outside of Adrienne Kennedy, there are many other Black women who are doing something similar, right, in terms of autobiographical writing. And I'm curious to know who are some of the folks that you would encourage our audience to check out their works and read, right, to gain a bit more knowledge around their lived experiences. Yeah, who are some of the folks you would throw out there?
One person that comes to mind for me is Katori Hall. I mean, she has taken her life in Memphis, Tennessee, and has used that, as a canvas for a number of things, right? That we see in her plays, that we certainly see in the Stars, series, Valley. She's also working through, as are many other autobiographical writers working in the dramatic tradition, working through aspects of one's personal life, right, that still need resolving. So I would certainly start with her.
Right. Dr. Braxton, who would you add to that list?
Well, I'm thinking of my own experience as a young student of theater, and I did major in theater in college, and went into literature, partly because of the dearth of roles at that time for Black women. But I think we should still be reading Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. And what I would suggest is that we read it in relation to all of the other artists who are interacting with it. You understand an Alice Walker much better if you read A Raisin in the Sun, because this is what's inspiring her. And I also think that we should be reading Alice Walker, and we should be watching the work of Omiyemi Artisha Green, the Dance of the Orcas.
Yes.
And we should be thinking about the way in which our people have a kind of relationship with the natural world, and an indigeneity, if you will, that keeps us constantly trying to save not only ourselves but the planet.
Right.
So we are in a position to learn from nature and to represent that in theater. And I also think that people should, when you should go to church and listen to a sermon,
Mm-hmm.
and listen to it as if it were theater sometimes. And it's no accident that so many small Black churches started, as in theaters, in former theaters.
Yes.
Even today, you'll see that. So you can learn a lot about a performance, about the power of testimony,
Yes.
about the necessity of listening, because part of what makes this particular play work is something that makes healing work in our communities of origin, just of respect for others, and the capacity to listen deeply. So be aware of the presence of and the power of presence of performance everywhere it presents in life, whether it's a child dancing in the street, or whether it is something more traditionally associated with the stage. It really is true that art imitates life.
Yes. It's you both mentioned some of my favorite people in that list. Katori Hall, which I want to acknowledge that Katori Hall won the 2021 Pulitzer Prize in drama, right? And so she's a major playwright making serious moves. And what I'm really I would add Dominique Morisseau to that list as well with Katori Hall, another playwright, primarily because they are not just simply writing theater or black theater or theater that centers around women, but their work is a very local play space. So Katori Hall, who's writing about Memphis, as you mentioned, and then you have Dominique Morisseau, who's doing something very similar, but in Detroit. And in many ways, they both acknowledge to some degree following behind or following the footsteps laid down by August Wilson in terms of theater, as he writes about the folks of Pittsburgh, a very local place that when August Wilson, similar to Dominique Morisseau and Katori Hall, began to sort of gain this national notoriety, the folks in Pittsburgh said, thank you, because we're often forgotten about, right? And I don't mean the folks in Pittsburgh, let me be very specific, the poor black folks in Pittsburgh, right? And Katori Hall is doing the same thing. And also Terrell Alvin McCraney, right? Even though his plays are taking place many of them are taking place in this fictional area, right? San Perry, Louisiana, there is a connection directly to the area of Miami, Florida, where he's from. He's writing about those people as well. And outside of theater, I would add, Maya Angelou as well. I would add Alice Walker, of course. I think about The Color Purple, a very important book in the context of Black women's lived experiences and the ways in which it is. I'm not talking about the film. The film is great, but I'm talking about the novel, the ways in which it starts off, dear God, right? The letters, again, debunking the idea that Black women or Black folks at certain time were illiterate and so forth, right? I would even add Georgia Douglas Johnson, both her plays and her poetry, and so forth to that list as well.
Lori Amanda, let's not forget her.
Yes. If I'm correct, Women of Brewster Place.
Yes, and Mama Day, which is set in the Sea Islands, and it invokes a lot of ancestral presence.
Yes.
So it's an amazing piece. Another one of our writers who left us.
Yeah, I was introduced to that book when I was a graduate student, and I took a class with Professor Cheryl L. Johnson at Miami, Ohio. She teaches Black women's literature, and I took a class with her. It was a class in Black women writing and feminism. And we read we read Mama Day. We also read Gail Jones, Corregidora. We read
Corregidora is an amazing novel.
Yes, I actually just heard that Gail Jones has another novel coming out as well. I'm really excited about it. But Dr. Braxton, you mentioned Professor Green's work, and so I want to sort of transition to talk about the creative work that both of them. I know that you are both primarily known as scholars of literature, including dramatic literature and Black studies. But I know that your creative books also traverse some of the very themes that we're discussing here. And so, for instance, Dr. Braxton, I actually just learned that you are a playwright in addition to being a scholar and a poet. And Professor Green, you just completed a film project. And so I want to know if you can share with us a little bit about those projects.
Sure. Dr. Braxton?
Well, I like to mention the connections, because my work with theater began as an undergraduate, performing iterations of a piece that would probably be what became Crossing of Deep River, a ritual drama in 3 acts, which you've mentioned. And one of the things that is most important for me about that is that is where Omiyemi and I really connected. You mentioned the thought of me giving a lecture. Well, one of the privileges of living a long time is that sometimes the people you have taught then become your teachers. And therefore we can have this intergenerational conversation, which takes on a different texture and a different quality because of that. I also learned a great deal from people like Baba Tunji Olatunji. Um, in addition to my traditional training in experimental theater, there is a traditional training in experimental theater, the open stage, that living theater. Those folks were the people I was working with as an undergraduate. When I fused that with my own cultural interests, the idea was to create a remembrance of those who had died in the Middle Passage, who had never become anyone's ancestor, so that we could ancestorize them and claim them, that when we pour a libation for them, they are served as almost as if we become their children. We ancestorize them. So crossing a deep river turned on the central ritual of ancestrization from the sacred Ifa corpus, which we were allowed to use by uh, uh, Dr. Wande Abimbola. And it also was a piece that broke the proscenium. So, in the way that the ritual was performed, a ritual drama, there were times when the players were out in the audience, and there was really no way of distancing yourself from the experience of being with those people who were in the ship. One of the things that the director did with those players was to take them out and actually lock them in the bottom of an 18th century ship in the dark, and so that they could experience what our ancestors who survived experienced. And this is to develop compassion not only for those who were lost in the Middle Passage, but for our known ancestors and for ourselves. And out of that work, my more authentic self arises because we are more than these professorial positions and the titles that go with them. We are first and foremost what we covenanted with our ancestors to be. And that is one of the reasons it's very important that we too tell our stories, because we are more than who they say we are.
Thank you.
I hope that makes sense.
It does. This has been a very spirited and spiritual discussion, and I'm taking a lot in today, and thinking about a lot. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so it's this process of, for sure, working with Dr. Braxton on crossing a deep river. It's indeed, I want to bring into this space Dr. Yasmin Lambert, aka Eve Graves,
Yes.
who was directing that production at that time. And the process drama, for sure, of being locked in the dark in the hull of a ship. It's the day we were in PBK 222, which means nothing to you, Khalid, but everything to Dr. Braxton and I, when she was standing in front of the chalkboard, and she was saying to us at that time that you don't know or realize the importance of what you're doing now, but you will in the future. And 12 years to the date, Dr. Braxton was asking me to then participate with her in an ancestral remembrance tribute. Excuse me. So now it has gone from performativity, like the drama of it, that is, in the
Right.
staging, to like part of my practice.
Right.
Right. So now we're at a community ancestral remembrance tribute. And we are reading pieces from Crossing a Deep River. I'm doing it with one of my best sisters, in the world, another William and Mary alum. And at the same time, it is that day when I hear my ancestors directing me towards a group of people standing in white. And it would be this group of people that would then get me started in the tradition of formally Isheshe Lagba. And I eventually became a priest of, Ifa and Orisha. But the seeds for that were planted in the production with Dr. Braxton, right? So, she moves me full circle in the development of my own cultural consciousness, and certainly in the ethics of my work as a scholar, as a director, as a dramaturg, and also in my role as a priest, right? All of this is feeding itself and each other, and prayerfully those who engage, my written scholarship and also my creative scholarship. What the project that is being referenced and lifted up in this space here, Dance of the Orcas, certainly fits within the context of this discussion on autobiographical writing. It was born out of my own need to do as Helen Sixu said, which was to women, that woman must write herself, must write about women, and bring women to writing from which they have been driven away as violently as their bodies. And I had, in the process of, becoming a woman, developed, some internal health conditions that had gotten to a point of needing surgery. And in engaging in that act of self-care, simultaneously was able to bear witness to an orca whale who had given birth to a calf. Within hours, the calf died, and for the next 17 days, she pushed her deceased calf, through the Pacific Northwest, supported by a community of women, right, who helped her in her tour of grief. And in watching this display, I began to, I was able to see myself in nature. When Dr. Braxton talks about paying attention to nature as an opportunity for self-reflection, in the tradition of Ifa Orisha, the thinking is that, nature is a reflection of us. We are a reflection of nature, and together we tell the story of the one, right? And so using the experience of Tahlequah or J35, I was able to process a similar experience for myself, but also come back to my body and begin to think about how I had allowed trauma over the years to take up space. And so the very act of writing became, another extension of something else I learned from Dr. Braxton. And this is this process of narrative medicine, right? Which is the idea of writing becoming a tool of therapy by which one is able to process, by which one is able to heal, by which one is able to renew oneself. So I wrote this work. Then it became a community event that was, that brought other women who had similar experiences to the work: costume designer, choreographer, a band, and many of these individuals were also either directly or cursorily involved in Ifa Orisha. We put this work together. It had a live formation in 2019. And then in 2020, when many of us were trying to wrestle with, our own ability to imagine what life could look like in the middle of a pandemic, and certainly wrestling with the ephemeral nature of theater itself, began to pivot into other forms of cultural production. I moved into film. I took this as an opportunity, a signal from the universe, a signal from my Ori that I needed to act on things that had inspired me and to not waste time, right? To take advantage of the moment. So Dance of the Orcas went from a live production to a film. William and Mary, Christopher Newport University, few entities within William and Mary, including my own production and wellness and consulting company, OmiWorks, produced it. And it recently had a premiere at the 6th annual Africana Film Festival, here in Richmond. So the work is Dance of the Orcas is becoming more accessible to others beyond its original form, which is wonderful. And it's giving other people, women, and men and children, an opportunity, to engage the beauty of nature and to also see it as a source, for healing and personal restoration.
Wow.
I think it's really important at this moment to acknowledge the importance of lamentation.
Yeah.
Because so many of us are experiencing grief on a massive scale as a result of everything that we've endured during COVID.
Yes.
So your performance piece, grounded in everything Paul Carter Harrison had to say about spirituality, teaches us a great deal about how we can be resilient and survive at this time. And thank you for the nod to narrative medicine. I appreciate it.
Yes. I want to stick on that for just a second, Dr. Braxton, this idea of lamentation. And in my work as a student and also now as a junior scholar, deals primarily with, has dealt primarily with Black women playwrights and Black feminist theater performance. And in my master's thesis, which looked at the works of Pearl Clegg, and also my dissertation, which looked at the work of Linda Dickerson, I argued that both of these creative artists, they created works that allow women, Black women in particular, to lament in a safe space. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. But at least I know that I was on the right path somewhere. Yeah,
Very much so.
That safe space is so critical. I'm sorry, Khalid. That safe space to lament is so critical because we often feel as if, one, we don't have the luxury of lamenting, but two, that the spaces in which we function are hostile and toxic and are not conducive to such lamenting, right? And then there's all sorts of consequences that can come from the act of lamenting. And so nature, bringing it back to Dance of the Orcas, the ocean, specifically the beach, that was a place where in that film, the central character felt safe, to do so. And in the process of engaging with nature, she also engages with her ancestors, right? So her ancestors come from this, from nature, to remind her, of the necessity of testifying and lamenting and not allowing things to take up residence in the body.
Right. Let me ask you, where can we see this film? Can you share that with our audience?
And so, right now the link is hidden because as I seek to get more exposure by way of film festivals, there's all sorts of little ways in which we have to show the film without making it completely accessible.
Okay.
But if you write me, I can make it happen.
And they can find you at William and Mary's website, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. I just want to make sure our audience gets an opportunity to engage, right? We got a couple comments from the audience. I'm going to turn over to that as I see that we're nearing our hour together here. One person says, this is not a question, but reactions coming in. And this person says, the discussion of church as theater and theater as church is gorgeous. I'm feeling so grateful to be in the digital presence of these thinkers. Thank you for that comment. And we do have a question. Do you think Black women's stories in literature have more hurdles or backlash than literature written by Black men? And do you think the play would have had the same impact if it was a man's story? That's a good question. That's a good question.
Professor Green, do you have an answer for that?
I'm thinking.
I think that jump in, Professor Green.
I mean, I'm what I hear in this moment for sure is something that I heard that transcends theater. Something my parents used to say all the time is that, being a Black woman means that you have, two burdens to bear, so to speak, your gender, and your racial ethnic makeup. And so on the premise and strength of that alone, I'm certainly in somewhat in agreement with the querent here, but it's hard to say. I mean, for me to say that the play would have had a different impact if a man had written it. I don't know. I don't know that I want to make that kind of generalization.
Right. Or that kind of value process.
Right.
Yeah. 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 But I'm glad that you pointed out the idea of the notion of intersectionality, right? I think back on Glenn Dickerson's groundbreaking essay, The Cult of True Womanhood, an African American woman is a womanist attitude towards African American theater, and he talks about how women historically, Black women historically, have been triply, she uses the quote, triply locked out by race, class, and gender. And so she's sort of giving a nod to this idea of intersectionality before the term came into vogue. But recognizing, as many Black women have done in their work, particularly their literature, as early as Sojourner's Truth, acknowledging how gender very much with their race. And so thinking about that, thank you for that. Yeah, yeah. Well, we are coming up on our time together, and I want to ask one final question, and that is to share and impart some more wisdom, I should say, to our viewers here, and that is for those who are interested in writing, be it a autobiographical writing or imagine fictional writing, what would be your advice to them?
I have an answer at the ready. Okay. To let your work be a testament of who you are at your core and do not compromise for anyone. That is something that my grandmother, Dorothy Miner, told me. It was wisdom that she shared with me years before she transitioned and became an ancestor. It was something that was brought home to me most recently within the past year or so, where I found myself in a position of compromising, only for the ancestors to come in and make sure that the truth, emerged. However, the trauma of compromising, right, is what I'm currently working through as I seek to, heal myself. And so the lesson in that, for sure, was to not compromise, from the beginning. That one's integrity in their process of writing and in what they're actually writing, the autobiographical nature of it, the imagined nature of it, to stay true to that.
Thank you. And Dr. Braxton, we'll give you the final word.
I would go back to Paul Carter Harrison's notion as he revisits actually the African concept of nomo, the idea of breath and words being connected. We should always seek to be our most authentic selves.
Mhm.
And the risk of not being our most authentic selves, as Professor Green suggests, is that the moral trauma can otherwise take up residence in our bodies as stress.
Yes.
That's why my recent work has entered the field of bioethics as well. We can use writing as a tool to increase our resiliency and our plasticity of response to oppressive environments. This is not exactly the same thing as therapy. It is the employment of writing as a technology to mediate your own experience and your own understanding of harm. So when Adrienne Rich's son, Adam, stands behind her in the play, he is not merely standing behind her, he is standing under her and stating his understanding
Yes.
and standing behindness as she repudiates um, something really traumatic that happened to her. As she says, I am figuring it out as I'm telling you. She says that in the course of the play. And we will too. Writing, maybe choosing a special time of day that is your time to write and you come back to that time. Meditation, the giving yourself the space and the permission to visit with this technology, which works as well for astronauts and scientists as it does for artists. Employ the technology, heal thyself, and that's what I have to say. That is narrative medicine. Our grandmas had it. You know, when my grandma was talking to me, when Omi's grandma was talking to her, they already had narrative medicine. We're just reclaiming these aspects of the oral tradition and extending them into an ever evolving aesthetic space. May it be so.
Okay.
Dr. Joanne Braxton, Professor Omiyemi Green. This has been great. I want to thank you both for joining us tonight and for concluding our series of symposiums in conjunction with Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles by Adrian Kennedy and Adam Kennedy. I want to tell our audience, get your tickets. You can see the production in person or you can see a virtual a recording of the production. Get your tickets. It's worth it. It is a great show. Thank you all and have a wonderful, wonderful night. We'll talk soon.
Many blessings.
Thank you.